Welcome to another episode of Trial Site News. On today's show, we're going to be talking about South Africa and what appears to be the death knell for ivermectin use in that country for COVID-19. We're going to discuss the SAHPRA statement about terminating its ivermectin-controlled compassionate use access program in this episode. And so, from Trial Site News, I am Adrian, and our episode is starting right now. South Africa's drug regulator has terminated its controversial COVID-19 ivermectin program. The South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, otherwise known as SAHPRA, will no longer allow importation of unrecovered ivermectin products, nor can health facilities hold bulk ivermectin stock in anticipation of prescriptions for the unregistered products. The controversial Section 21 approval program is now gone, and with it a piece of South African history. And now, culminating with this victorious lawsuit with bittersweet real-world implications, SAHPRA has appeared to pound in the last nail in ivermectin's COVID-19 coffin, at least in this part of the world. Now, before we get to the backstory of this saga, a reminder: the World Health Organization's official stance on ivermectin for the use of COVID-19 is as follows. The WHO advises that ivermectin only be used to treat COVID-19 within clinical trials. They state that, quote, the current evidence on the use of ivermectin to treat COVID-19 patients is inconclusive. Until more data is available, the WHO recommends that the drug only to be used within clinical trials. And here in the States, the FDA also issued warnings on the drug, which follows in tow with the WHO stance, as well as additional warnings against the use of the animal version of the drug in humans. Okay, so back to the story now. We here at Trial Site News have chronicled how ivermectin was used extensively in the African nation as an early care treatment for SARS-CoV-2, the virus which of course is behind COVID-19. Due to the explosion of use during the early stages of the pandemic, by late 2020, the South Africa Health Products Regulatory Authority, or SAHPRA, made a draconian move. They outright banned its importation and use for COVID-19. Effectively, SAHPRA criminalized a generic drug used to eradicate river blindness in other parts of Africa. And so, raids and arrests were made, including the raid of a hospital in Durban. The regulator's position was that many illicit products were entering the market, creating a black market threatening the health and safety of the South African population. Naturally, lawsuits would soon follow, as well as resistance in the form of organizing across the civil society, which culminated in intense pressure, leading to SAHPRA announcing by January of 2021 a controlled compassionate access to ivermectin for COVID-19 early care. But although the regulator accepted the use at the time, access was nearly impossible under Article 21, as physicians had to apply for compassionate use each and every time, and tens of thousands of people wanted the treatment. This would trigger another lawsuit, as we here at Trial Site News reported, and by March 2021, the regulator gave in and negotiated a settlement involving the African Christian Democratic Party, otherwise known as the ACDP, and an activist group known as AFRE Forum. They authorized the use of ivermectin for COVID-19 as an off-label regimen. However, as we here at Trial Site News chronicled, the victory for ivermectin proponents in healthcare and across civil society was bittersweet. As it turns out, the ruling hinged the access to the source drug from within the country, which triggers a Section 21 clause, allowing the use of a particular version of ivermectin, a cream then registered with the county's regulator. Doctors could then prescribe ivermectin without having to apply to SAHPRA each and every time, but it would involve compounding for human use. Hence the need for healthcare facilities to hold bulk stock. Now, while the ruling offered a legal pathway for prescribing physicians and pharmacists to compound ivermectin for purposes of treating COVID-19 in South Africa, the actual practicalities of compounding and distributing the medication at scale during a pandemic made pragmatic implementation challenging. But proponents celebrated as community action had effectively taken on, and in some ways, was victorious over the state. But the victory was short-lived. Which then brings us back to the present, where SAHPRA is now terminating its ivermectin program. So let's take a look at the SAHPRA press release. It reads as follows. The use of ivermectin for the treatment and prevention of COVID-19 received a lot of public interest in 2020. Early evidence, mostly from studies with a small number of patients and conducted with varying degrees of scientific rigor, indicated some potential benefit in the management of COVID-19. Now, SAHPRA would go on then to explain what changed for them and why they are now terminating the ivermectin program. They said that, quote, there have been several developments regarding the evidence of efficacy of ivermectin since the program was adopted. These include the following. The studies that suggested potential efficacy of ivermectin in the prevention and treatment of COVID-19 and which motivated the adoption of the program have since been retracted. The key meta-analysis by Hill et al., upon which the proponents of ivermectin relied, has been retracted by the authors. This was due to serious ethical concerns regarding a study on which the meta-analysis heavily relied. The findings of 2 large clinical trials conducted in 2021 do not support the use of ivermectin for patients with COVID-19. 2 national health organizations updated their guidelines and do not recommend the use of ivermectin in patients with COVID-19 except in the context of clinical trials. The Health Regulatory Authority of the United States, otherwise known as the Food and Drug Administration, cautions against the use of ivermectin for COVID-19, except in the context of clinical trials. The FDA's Consumer Update of 12 October 2021 states that, quote, the FDA has not authorized or approved ivermectin for the treatment or prevention of COVID-19 in people or animals. Ivermectin has not been shown to be safe or effective for these indications. Taking large doses of ivermectin is dangerous, and even the levels of ivermectin for approved human uses can interact with other medications like blood thinners. You can also overdose on ivermectin, which can cause nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, hypertension, allergic reactions, itching and hives, dizziness, ataxia, which is problems with balance, seizures, coma, and even death. And finally, subsequent to the adoption of the program, the World Health Organization, or the WHO, issued an advisory recommending that ivermectin only be used within the context of clinical trials. Now, before we move on from this, a couple of notes about SAHPRA's rationale for termination. First, they said that studies that showed benefit of ivermectin have been retracted. Now, this could be deemed as misleading as a couple of studies were indeed retracted, and important meta-analysis showcasing benefits were retracted by 1 journal, but there are still 84 studies conducted. Next, they talked about the key meta-analysis by Hill et al., which retracted. Now, there are many questions about the Hill meta-analysis. Hill himself was originally very bullish on the drug, but the sponsors of the study, Unitaid, have been accused of changing the document to convey a less upbeat recommendation. So essentially, SAHPRA here is following the herd, and they are merely falling in line with the FDA and other leading agencies such as EMA, as they so declared that, quote, SAHPRA is under duty to consider all the published data and the conclusions of the aforementioned reputable authorities, thus leading to a lack of equipoise. Plus, SAHPRA points to the fact that vaccines are now widely available. Although only about 31% of the South African population is fully vaccinated, this according to Our World in data. They would also go on to point out that due to vaccines, available antivirals, a lack of demand, and the fact that the agency argues that there is, quote, no credible evidence to support a therapeutic role for ivermectin in COVID-19, the program was terminated. And so that's it. SAHPRA has closed the door on ivermectin. And of course, as always, we will keep you posted on this story as it continues to develop. And that, my friends, brings our episode to a close once more. Thank you so much for joining me on the program today. From Trial Site News, I am Adrian, and I will see you all next time.